Non possiamo però salutarci prima di parlare dell'innovazione in ambito medicale. Maker Faire ha sempre un occhio di riguardo e questa volta, a proposito di ospiti internazionali, per parlarne su questo palco c'è la professoressa di Medicina Fisica e Riabilitazione all'Università della Pennsylvania, Michelle Johnson. Welcome, Michelle.
Buonasera. That's as far as I remember my Italian. That's actually not true. I spent 2 years here. So I know a little bit more. So thank you for having me. When I think about the future of rehabilitation robotics, may I get the clicker, please? Thank you. When I think about the future of rehabilitation robotics, I imagine actually 2 words that I want to see as a part of it. Inclusivity and affordability. And why do I say this? I think as because of COVID, infectious and non-infectious diseases are ravaging our society. And if they don't kill us, they tend to make us disabled. And living and having to live with impairments as a result of COVID will allow us to have difficulty in our everyday lives. Now the problem is when we have this growing number of people with disability and we're still combating the fact that we don't have enough people to take care of those of us who may have an impairment, we end up with this gap in care. So take for instance stroke. So stroke is a cardiovascular accident that might result as a result of complications due to hypertension, HIV, and now even COVID. We're finding that COVID might increase your chances of having a stroke. Now there are about 16.9 million stroke survivors worldwide. And if you have a stroke, you stand about 2/3 of the person that have a first-time stroke will end up with physical and cognitive disabilities as a result of the stroke. This is my grandmother. She looks fabulous, right? She was born in 1914, and she was born in the island of Jamaica. And when my grandmother was young, she was a seamstress, capable, fabulous. And in 1994, my grandmother had a stroke. It was devastating. But fortunately for her, grandmother was in the United States, so she got the best of care. And then though, when I keep thinking, well, what if she wasn't in the United States? What would that care look like? And I realized, and I did some stats, and I realized that if my grandmother had still stayed in Jamaica, she would have probably had a stroke 16 or 15 years before she had it at 79. And then she would have probably been 5.4 times more likely to have died of that stroke within 3 years of having the first-time stroke. And then I also found out that because of there's about a 12-fold decrease in the ratio between patients, or actually increase. So there are less therapists to each patient who has a stroke, so there are less people likely to be able to take care of her. And there's about a 30-fold decrease in the amount of money that is spent on healthcare in Jamaica. Therefore, she would have probably had less access to inpatient rehabilitation, outpatient rehabilitation, and the ability to get the therapy 3 times a week for 12 months as required by the World Health Organization. So when I think about those odds, I'm actually excited and feeling fortunate that my grandmother was in the United States when she had a stroke, but at the same time I'm sad by the almost 70% of stroke survivors who are born, who when they have a stroke, live in low and middle income countries. where access to care is quite limited. So this is my area, rehabilitation robotics. And I think of rehabilitation robotics as being super promising. This is an area that in the United States, in places like Italy and Japan, has given us encouragement and declare that there's a promise for maybe supporting stroke and people with disabilities in the future. Now, when we think about these robots, though, and we ponder kind of their development, we're aware of a couple of things. One is that most of them are only available in high-income countries. Most of them, and when there's actually a recent study that came out that showed that 95% of the activity with these robots are happening in these high-income countries. And the study also concluded that these robots are quite expensive and not really affordable for low and middle income countries. And then it also suggests that what might be of hope, though, if we could figure this out, is being able to automate interventions and robot therapies, and maybe even leverage better the time of rehabilitation professionals and their efforts. So if we could make them more affordable, that would mean that we could possibly transform rehabilitation after stroke. Another thing that is actually something that we find out is that most of the time these robots are only treating people with motor issues. But what's true about stroke and most diseases is that the average person that survives them and live with a disability often have other issues involved. They often have cognitive impairments. They are also living with comorbidities that make their care complex. The other thing that we should realize, and that we have realized when we examine these rehab robots, is most of them are mechanically complex, huge, so there's a space issue when you try to use them in low resource settings and in developing countries, and they're usually so expensive that they're outpricing the ability to afford them in these developing and low resource settings, developing countries in low resource settings. So this is why I suggest that the future of rehab robotics must consider and use and be able to target inclusivity and affordability as our future very, very important targets and design. So how have I operationalized this? And in terms of the near future, what I'm hoping to see and build a future that I want. So I've been working in Mexico and in Botswana. And I've been thinking about how to use or create robots that could be more affordable and also more inclusive. For example, this might have been about 10 years ago, working in Mexico, we decided to create a haptic robot training environment using gaming. And then we combined that robot with about 5 other sites or stations within this small room. And we designed, to get the affordability part, we decided that we would create the entire 6-station gym to be less than $29,000 US, and that it would be able to be operated by 1 clinician, 1 technician, and then 6 patients can get their workout on in the gym. And what we found when we did this study was that patients were happy, they came back often, and they didn't want to stop the therapy. So it was a success, but it was still quite expensive. And it was in Mexico that I found that affordability is relative. And this is the definition of affordability. It is what the person can afford. So what is affordable in Mexico is not necessarily affordable in the US, Actually, it would be the opposite. What is affordable in the US is not necessarily affordable in Mexico, where the average income of a person is 5 times less than what is in the US. And then what is affordable in the other country that I've been working in Botswana, is even 2 times less than what is affordable in Mexico, and therefore 10 times less than what's affordable in the US. So one of the things that we did after our work in Mexico is to reimagine this gym to maybe be something a little bit more affordable. And our goal was that it would cost less than $3,000 US dollars. So right now, we're working in 2 places in Botswana. And Botswana, remember, is in sub-Saharan Africa, where there is a high level of HIV, and a third of the HIV persons living with HIV have had a stroke. So there's a high level of both motor and cognitive impairments. So in the hospitals there, we've been trying to think about how do we be able to test the feasibility of bringing robots to a low and middle income country like Botswana. So one of the things that we've had to do was try to figure out how do we make our algorithms more inclusive? How do we make the fact that we can evaluate people that have both motor and cognitive impairments, for example, more easily? So we've created new algorithms. I just graduated one of my PhD students and thinking about how cognitive and motor assessments can be done via our robotic systems. And so this is an example of us testing patients in the USA and patients in Botswana. More recently, we've been actually working with colleagues here in Rome at Campus Biomedica di Roma, and at the Zolo Lab, we've been collaborating on rethinking how to be more affordable. How do we get rehab robots that are more affordable? So we've been using this idea of reconfigurability and modularity, and so we developed together this system we call Pentarob. And the idea is that by thinking about simple modules, we can reconfigure them into more complex spaces. So this spirit of innovation that I see here at Maker Faire, and I've heard in all the talks that have gone before me, is exciting to hear about. And one of the things that I want to do is that, and I want to encourage us, is to harness this spirit to be able to make rehabilitation robots accessible to all. And I think that we can harness this to make people like my grandmother don't feel like they have to move to Italy or the United States in order to get their care. Thank you.